We going to wait for. Okay. Okay. So if everyone is good, then yeah, we'll continue with the next lesson. Um, and I know this book has a very unique reputation. Um, and so yeah, let's dive into it and talk about it. Song of Solomon. Um, and um, it is also called Song of Songs. Um, it is literally taken from the first verse of the Hebrew Bibles. It, the title, and it is, yeah, as I said, it is called the Song of Songs. And if we look at again the ancient translation, it is in the Greek version. It is called. Oh no, it is it derives from that. Sorry. Um, and if we go to what is this? No, never mind. But the title means the Song of Songs. From deprived from the Hebrew translation, it also means the best song. It is. You can compare it to the Holy of Holies, because again, it is um, it, it contains of songs. I mean, very obvious from the name, but the title alone it means the best of songs, or the Holy of Holies, or the ultimate song even. Um, and and of course the book was written through, as every other book in the Bible was written through divine inspiration, and we always have to acknowledge it because as I said before, this is a very unique book, very, I would say, graphic, but we need to understand that it was written through divine inspiration. Even though God's name is not mentioned in the book, but it is a theme of love, of pure love and passion, and but it does point to a divine origin. So we always have to acknowledge it, and we cannot look at this book with our human thinking or carnal thinking, because it is really pure love, or love at its best. And of course, and ultimately to praise God and to have Him as, and be thankful for Him, to have Him as a creator. And so we need to always, if we read this book, if we continue to study this book, is to, or just read through this book, that we have to acknowledge that it is through divine inspiration, and we need to read it in the Spirit, especially. And again, wait, yes, this is just again, as I said before, this is a short overview or brief um, Wiederholung, review, yeah, review of what I said before. Yeah, this is just Song of Solomon in a nutshell. If we take it like that. And of course, it's very obvious who the author is, and it was songs. No, it is Solomon. But of course, we know what who Solomon is. We know that he was not. How do we call? How do we? I'm really trying my best not to put any jokes or anything, but we know his lifestyle. So we know Solomon's lifestyle. He was not a husband of just one woman, but and it is very kind of contradicting that she wrote this book, because it is again it describes the love of between man and woman. Yeah, man and woman. in singular, not. and but there is an explanation to it, that he wrote this book before he became polygamous. That would make sense. So before he went crazy and all that, but that's how we kind of see see uh, see that in that way, that before his sinful lifestyle, he wrote this book. Any questions? Okay, and again, as we also how we looked at the book of Ecclesiastes, we also need to know the the purpose of the book. And of, as I already mentioned, its primary purpose is to show us the loving relationship between a man and a woman, or husband and wife, how it should look like. Um, it does show us the ideal attitudes and actions for people that are in love. And also, if we put it more in a spiritual sense, or this in a spiritual sense, because the book, if we look at it, in everyone I mentioned before, allegory is a term. Yeah, why not? Because the book is not. I mean, you can look at this as an allegory, but it is also a poetic book. But what is an allegory?
Allegory is like a personification of emotions, or like, yeah, emotions, or like things, words. So we wisdom, or these kind of things that are not real, like actual people, but they like describe them as if they were like persons that are standing in front of us.
It is just the description of a story, and try to find a spiritual meaning behind it, or a deeper meaning behind it, and and that's how we also, as I said, the book of Song of Solomon was not written with the idea of being an allegory, but yet we can still take it as an allegory, if it makes sense. And yes, and also, yeah, the love that is in this book is, um, as I said before, it values, it celebrates, also the sexual love in the marriage. It is, again, because I remember we, with the youth, I think it was last week, there was a question that, we are all adults here, so that sex is not only for procreation, but or just having children, but it is, because if you look at when this was written, when the book was written, it was in a time where woman's worth, the worth of a woman, is defined by the numbers of her children. And so, if we read this book, it is just, it is love between husband and wife without procreation. Might make sense. It was just pure love between man and woman, and but if we look at it, there was not a trace of procreation in that book. Um, and again, if we look at it in an allegory, the divine love, it goes deeper, with God. It is the love relationship between Christ and the church. And and also, if we read it correctly through a spiritual sense, it helps us also to understand how intimate, how deep God's love is for his church, for his bride. And we can kind of see it through the description of how those people in the book, the Shulamite woman and Solomon, how they describe their love for each other, and very vivid, very, as I said, also graphic. But it was just this intimacy that they shared between each other. Yeah, and I already mentioned her, the Shulamite woman. Um, and in chapter 1, verse 2 to 4, it already opens up her about her. She was a young woman. It was not the time. It was still the time where her and Solomon, they were still courting. Is that a term? I think you guys know. It is because the word. I mean, courting is, yeah, it's like dating, but with the intention of marriage. Because nowadays people can date each other, but just to date for the sake of dating, but there's no actual meaning behind it. But courting is more, because courting is more like how people used to do it back then, and dating became is like more the modern term, but more casual, I would say. So courting is more intentional. That okay, this person, I'm going to end up with this person and spend life with this person, and in that time, there was already, and how the book opens up, it was already the Shulamite woman and Solomon already courting, and we can also put Solomon in the category that he was her her boyfriend. Um, but very significant fact about the book that she took the majority of the book, like her expression. It took a significant portion of the book. It is about 53%. Um, we see how she was expressing her love in a very strong manner. Because she was a very expressive character. Also, how she saw herself as well. We will go into that, but how she saw herself, because she was also insecure about herself. But at the same time, she saw herself equal to Solomon. It was not she was under him or anything, but how she expressed her love. It was in a mutual manner. It was not okay. She's lower than him. No, but it was in a Gleichberechtigung, um, same rights. Not trying to get political here, but we see her thoughts, we see her feelings. They are deeply how as I said, how she expressed it very deeply. It is, and we could say that it is more about her love story, not Solomon, but more her love story from her perspective, and how Solomon was responding to her love. And as already mentioned, their courtship. Is it clear what courtship is when people are courting? I mean, this is also still the case because nowadays we call it more dating, but still there are people that are courting. Um, Again, of course, when you date someone, there has to be the intention to marry that person. But if we put it into a worldly perspective, when people are dating, it's just dating, having a relationship with that person, but not really thinking so far ahead in modern times. But back then, even though if you're not Christian or spiritual, there was still this courtship, and it was already um, a plan for marriage. And we read this courtship in again in chapter 1 to starting from verse 2 until chapter 3 verse 5, and this is the section of their courtship. And and then it highlights also the importance of because as I said before, there's also a lot of feelings involved in the relationship, and it also highlights the importance of sexual restraint before marriage. Yet but still at the same time it was contrasting the intimacy that would follow up to the wedding, but still at the same time um, we see that it was so important to stay pure before marriage, even though the young woman, the Shulamite woman was even expressing her desire for her boyfriend's physical affection. She, how she would describe him as as yeah, as she would describe him. And again, I encourage you to read it by yourself. It's very direct, very open, but also, as I said, she had also insecurity about herself, um, about her appearance, because she was working in vineyards, and through by working in vineyards she was exposed to the sun, so she had darker skin than other women that had other tasks. The how she described herself, we can even read it in the text that she would describe herself black, but it is not connected to race. It was just her skin, no association with her from where she is, but it was just because she was working all day in the field, and that was and through that she was also insecure because she compared herself to other women in her home. But we see how Solomon in what was that in still in chapter one, between chapter one and two, how they describe their love towards one another, intensifying their love for one another, and him complimenting her, describing her, being unique to her, and that is just very beautiful to read, how they would communicate to one another, how they would compliment one another, how they would express their love for one another, and she like if we take a example in chapter one, where she spoke to Solomon about his charming personality, and their meeting place in the countryside. And as I said before, she, because of her looks, she described herself as common, not attractive, and she would compare herself to a rose in, if we read it in chapter two, she's like the rose of Sharon, or the lilies in the valleys, because it is very common to see roses and or lilies in valleys. And for her, her beauty, her appearance was not special. But through Solomon's praise for her, it made her feel more secure about herself. He was a gentleman. He affirmed her beauty. He affirmed her rare beauty, actually, to other women. And also she responded to that by describing him also as a rare find. Where is this? She described him like an apple tree among other trees, symbolizing his sweetness and beauty and protection. And and yes, and that's how they would communicate to one another, and also a very good inspiration for the readers. And that was in their courtship. They were already expressing their love um, towards one another, how they were complimenting one another, praising one another, and then we follow up to their wedding. And we read the wedding in chapter 3, verse 6 to chapter 5, verse 1. Excuse me. So about the wedding, if we go back to ancient Israel, um, to civil ceremonies, not religious ones, um, just just like we have it here, it always took place in homes before the local town elders, and that's how civil weddings were done back then in ancient Israel, and also the main parts of those weddings were the selection of the bride, um, the groom's parents. They chose a bride for their son, of course with the consent of both sides, from both parents, and 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 also, yeah, both, exactly, and also the consent of the groom as well. So no one was forced to that wedding. It's not like, no, I'm not I'm not saying this, but and then when we continue to the wedding day procession, the ceremonial celebration. Um, this is still the Jewish wedding, or the weddings in ancient Israel. The procession, it was, as I said, it was on the wedding day. So the groom was accompanied by his friends, and they would go to the house of the bride, and then they would escort her to the ceremony. So very different from what we are used to. And then later on, then she would take her to their new home. And then, of course, the marriage was how do you um, pronounce consummated? Yeah, consummated the night after the ceremony. And then following after that, they would have a 7-day feast, very long wedding. Following the ceremony, the couple and their friends, they would celebrate it, yeah, for 7 days. Um, and we see this actually, the wedding between the Shulamite woman and Solomon. I already said it before in chapter 3, verse 6 to chapter 5, verse 1. But Solomon's wedding procession, because we know he was a very rich man, he was a king. Because his procession, the ceremony was very big. It was very exceptional, um, and it showed, and also it reflected the significance of marriage. That it is one of the most important events of someone's life. Um, and even scripture emphasized that the union of a couple should be commemorated in a special way, not like just casually, but there has to be a celebration, and it also, even until now, it serves as a um, powerful testament to everyone. It was not just for the couple, but to their friends, to their families. But going back to Solomon's procession, to his celebration, it included 60 warriors, his elite warriors. They were his personal bodyguards when he picked up his bride from her house. He took those 60 warriors with him. It was very special celebration. So it was not just his closest friends, but he came with his best warriors. Or we can also put those warriors in the category of his friends, but 60 of those accompanied him, picking her up, and it symbolized the protection of a husband, that he is a provider. Um, and also he provided his bride with the best that he could afford, and that included the crown that he got from his mother Bathsheba. And with that crown, he represented his joy and royalty, and it was also demonstration of self-sacrifice, because he had a genuine love for his bride. And again, the marriage was not only their marriage was not only focusing on the physical attractiveness alone, but how we already read before, their communication, how they would praise one another. There was a complete admiration, both physically and spiritually and mentally. And and as I said, he delighted in his bride. Solomon delighted in his bride, um, and he accepted her as accepted her as she was, and there was again and they enjoyed the intimacy in their marriage. Any questions? Is it clear? So we were just talking about the wedding. Now we will go to the marriage. Um, we already mentioned it before. The consummation of the marriage. We had this already, um, because as I said, it would follow right after, during or after the wedding procession, um, and that's also where they celebrated each other's beauty and purity, um, and and there's also this mutual self-giving, between husband and wife in the marriage. And we see here because we will go a little bit in details about their marriage. We see in chapter 4, verse 1 to 7, how Solomon expresses his deep admiration for his bride. He, as I said, he described her beauty through vivid, but also at the same time very poetic imagery, drawn from her nature. He would describe her physical appearance in a very detailed way. I'm not going into that, but he described her, but but he was not only emphasizing her appearance, her attractiveness, but also her dignity, her uniqueness, um, especially when she felt insecure about herself. But for Solomon, she was completely beautiful. She was flawless in his eyes. She was a perfect woman for him. And he also invites. He also asks his wife to leave her former life behind, and start a new life together. And we read this in verse 8 from chapter 4, that I'm just um, summarizing this chapter, but he would tell her to start a new life with him, and not to look back, and also of course to commit herself in the intimacy of marriage. And this is all about most of it is Solomon, when he was talking, but he also delighted in the love of his bride and devotion, um, and how he would express his love for her, and also from both sides how she expressed her love, her tenderness, their covenant love towards one another. Um, it her affection or was described, as sweeter than wine. Um, Her kisses and presence are compared to fragrant perfumes, uh, honey and milk, and the cedars of Lebanon. And it was very, as I said, it was very poetic at the same time, but also very direct and vivid. And also, one of the things that he cherished about her, that she kept herself pure before marriage, she's portrayed in that is we see this in verse 12 to 15 as a locked garden or a sealed spring, and that was symbolizing her virginity before marriage. And Solomon was praising her for that, that she preserves for herself for her husband, that she is a um, flourishing garden filled with precious fruits, spices. I don't know if someone would still describe someone as a garden and everything, but that's how they communicated towards one another. Very poetic. Hebrew poism, not today's poetry, but they use all those metaphors to describe one another, to describe the richness or the whole person. Um, and then of course, when we go to the consummation of their marriage, that she invited her husband to enter the garden, symbolizing her self-giving in marriage. Um, it was a joyful invitation. It was celebrating their union, and loving one another, and have this pure love for one another, and have this complete acceptance for one another. There was no constraint or anything, but they were um, in love with one another. And again, the imagery of their of um, martial intimacy is portrayed as God's gift. It is, as we know, it is preserved for marriage, but unfortunately, in the days that we live in, it is seen, or just in general, sex is seen as something casual. Um, but that was never the intention or never the plan of God, because it was preserved in marriage. It is very special, a special bond between man and woman, and then yes, yeah. There's again a short, brief review about what we just talked about. They celebrated their mutual joy and love, their purity, their faithfulness, as we described, the Shulamite woman, her being a garden, a sealed garden, and that intimacy is a gift. Okay, and then we move on, because it doesn't stop only at the wedding and the marriage, but there's also people had to grow maturely in the marriage. And we see the song, it shifts to to the newly married couple, and also showing the realities of marriage. It was not only love, and do you also um, Rosa Rote Brille? Huh? Oh, you also say that. Yeah, roasting that glasses. It was not only that, but there's also the reality of it, of marriage, because and how love matures. It is mostly through conflict, through forgiveness, through communication, through renewed affection. It's the affection is not only for the beginning, but it is continually renewed through the maturing process, through being mature towards one another, and that was the reality or that is the reality of marriage. And we even see here an example of apathy, where there was a kind of like a brief time of separation, not a total separation, but it was just yeah. It is we read, or you can read it in chapter 5 verse 2 through 6, chapter 6 and verse 13. and we see this, or we go. Let's go through that. Um, it was I think it was a dream of the Shulamite woman that Solomon was he came to seek intimacy with her, but she was hesitating and she delayed. She didn't respond to it, and by the time when the door opened, or when she opened the door, he was already gone, and she regretted her decision. And in this example, it illustrated the neglecting of the emotional and physical need of someone's spouse, of your spouse, that it creates a distance in marriage, and that is an example for it. But yet, if we move on to chapter 9 to 16, sh- she again would describe Solomon as very special. She described him as, um, what is this? Yeah, she described him as a very special man. Even though they had their conflict, even though there was a conflict or a brief separation or a brief distance, yet they came back for admiring one another. They came back to love one another. That their love remained strong. And then in chapter 6, we see how they were reconciled again for one another. Again, they went back and reflected their love for one another, and it symbolized in this part of this chapter. It symbolized their appreciation towards one another, and it restored them. It restored their closeness. And then also, of course, through all of this, there was also the restoration of their intimacy. Instead of criticizing her, he responded to her love. He responded to her affection, just like on their wedding night. He was not he was not casting her away or whatever. He still accepted her. He still loved her and responded to her love, and it healed the emotional distance between them, and it healed their relationship, and it even strengthened the relationship. It even it's it and it strengthened the relationship through forgiveness and affirmation. Any questions? And just through that, they were, even though there was conflict in their marriage, even though there was a brief distance between one another, there was a distance emotionally, um, but yet, and physically, yet they came together through humility, through forgiveness, through appreciation, and also through gentle communication. And that's a good picture of a good marriage, a healthy marriage. And it is not only one-sided, but it is both sides. And if we're continuing on with chapters, with 7, we read again how they, again, as I said before, they were always praising one another, um, acknowledging their affection for one another, um, that we see the mutual desire towards one another. And again, I will not go into details how they would describe their love for one another, but you can read it yourself in chapter 7. But it is it is pure love, and that is how we also have to see it, because we know that it is the book is it's the most controversial book of the Bible because of its content, but we have to look at it through a pure perspective of love. We have to see it through how God sees it, and and that is very important to know that. Also very important in marriage that that the husband allows also the wife to express herself, and also at the same time, also on the other side, that she allows him to express himself, and that is portrayed by Solomon and the Shulamite woman. That's how they described it. Is there anything funny? Sorry. And and that is how marriage should be like. Okay, the conclusion to this book. And when we read this conclusion in chapter 8, the last chapter of the book, in verse 5 to 7, and it just summarizes the whole song. It summarizes the whole content of the song. Um, that that the couple, they emerged from the wilderness, symbolizing that they have overcame their insecurity, that they overcame temptation, they overcame conflict, they overcame the emotional distance together. And the Shulamite woman was a pure woman, and she kept Solomon very close to her heart, like how the book would describe it, like a treasured seal, and again expressing their permanent love towards one another, um, and also how it included how it would describe the nature of true love. Um, it's again, we read in 1 Corinthians 13 about love, but also how the Song of Solomon describe love, that love is as strong as death. It burns like a mighty flame. It cannot extinguish by floods. That it cannot be bought with wealth. If it's true love, those things, we cannot factor those in. If it is pure and genuine love towards one another, that nothing can separate it. Um, and it is, as again, as a conclusion, that the Song of Solomon is a, it teaches us genuine love. It teaches us that love is very powerful. It is very, that it is priceless. It is exclusive and enduring, and that is what love is. And if we look at God in that aspect, we see all those aspects. We see all those attributes to Him. Um, and then the book, it ends with an epilogue, and how they looked back, we will read that in chapter 8 from verse 8 to 12. Um, how she recalls her youth, her past, and she would um, talk about her brothers, how her brothers protected her purity. Um, she she would compare herself to a closed door rather to an open door. She would describe herself that she was faithful, that she was pure, and that she reserved herself for marriage, and it was not, and that and then later on that she freely gave herself to Solomon. It was not forced. It was not out of, yeah, no one forced her to do it, but she chose to love Solomon, and not also because he had wealth, he was a king, but yet it was genuine love between man and woman, how it should be like, and then how it ended. It was how the Song of Solomon ended. It was still at the very end. They still longed for one another. Their marriage continued. Even though we know that Solomon was not the most faithful one, like he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, but but through this story we see that their marriage continued. We see a good example how a marriage should look like. We see how we should love one another, how we should love our spouse, um, and it is by all those things that was described in the book, um, and the book, it invites the readers, it gives a picture of their love, of their enduring love through their married life, even though again it didn't describe marriage as perfect, but there was ups and downs, but yet they conquered those challenges, and that is what is this book about having a healthy marriage, and we can be inspired by this book. And it is not, again, it is not just a very physical book, not only about the physical part of marriage, but it is this both spiritual part, mentally, emotionally, and we have to look at it in that way. All the aspects of marriage, all the aspects of love, we have to acknowledge it, and not only one side, but all the aspects of it. Any questions? Anything you maybe thought about? I hope it was clear. Again, it is hard to put everything in one lesson, a whole book, but it was the best that I could do for now. But if there's nothing else, then it's that's it. Thank you.